G'day, I'm Tim Thompson. Today we're really privileged to be out near Gympie in Queensland at a place called Forage Farms. Now those of you that have never heard of it before might have heard of Stuart Andrews, son of Peter Andrews, who was the founder of natural sequence farming. We're going to have a look at his approach to a commercial property that he's running of 260 acres that used to be entirely beef cattle production and is now growing a cornucopia of produce. Stuart, how are you, mate?
Good, thanks, Tim. How are you?
Mate, I'm absolutely thrilled to spend a bit of time with you today. There's a lot of learnings that I think we can take out of what you're doing. The three big things that I'm interested in is how you're treating water as it flows across the landscape and how you're harnessing the potential of that water in such a dry country.
Yes.
I love hearing that you're not just talking about biodiversity of plant life, you're talking about biodiversity of the animal life that you're actually bringing onto the farm.
Yep.
The third thing is that you reckon you don't have to worry about pests and diseases nearly as much as your traditional farmers.
That's right, 100%.
I'm also really keen to hear your input into mistakes that you've made in the past and how you treat mistakes as learning experiences, because a lot of people won't talk about the mistakes they make, whereas you're very happy and open to talk about mistakes because you see them as a starting point, not the ending point of the conversation.
Spot on.
Mate, do you mind if we hop over the fence and have a look at what goes on?
Let's get into it, Tim.
Thanks very much, mate. We can't wait.
No worries.
And hey guys, if you like this video, don't forget, hit the little red subscribe button down there. You've got no idea how much it helps the channel, and you'll get to see more videos in the future. So Stuart, there's a few plants that I'm seeing in the landscape here that most people would absolutely have a fit about.
Yep.
And I suppose one of them here is this castor oil plant.
Yep.
And you've got that beautifully right next to a thistle.
Yep.
Now you're not bothered by them at all.
No, because what we do is we value every plant on its green surface area, and by that what we mean is its ability to harness sunlight. You get that sunlight, you capture that sunlight, it drives that plant then captures carbon, stores it in the soil. For all those guys that are worried about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that plant is storing tons of it for us every day, and it doesn't ask for a cent from you. And then what we do is say, we look at it and we look at the base of that plant, we say how much area is it occupying for the amount of green surface area it's creating, and it's bugger all. It's only occupying a very small area on the ground, yet a massive green area, so it's not limiting our production. In actual fact, it's pushing our production higher, because for all the carbon that it pumps in the ground, as well as water, because it condenses water at night, that ends up back into the soil. It makes the plants around it grow better. Look, the greenest grass is around the base of that plant. If you see the green grass in around there, it's greenest in around the base of that plant.
You know, there'd be people that would say, oh yeah, but the castor oil plant's toxic to our stock, we don't want our stock eating it, that sort of thing. But your argument back is that if you have a biodiverse environment, the stock never get to the position where they have to eat something they don't like the taste of.
If you've got an animal that eats a castor oil plant or any other plant and dies as a result, then I would question my management, because that means that animal was so sick it needed to eat more than that plant, more of that plant than its body was able to handle.
So it's a real change in mindset. All of the arguments that we have against weeds, like our little castor oil plant here, are that they take up valuable space, they poison our stock, we're growing plants that we don't need. But the reality is, for environment to be well, we need lots of different things in our environment. We need lots and lots of biodiversity, and the major argument for keeping these is not only do they keep the grass green around the base of them in what are we in at the moment, a severe drought.
Yep.
You've got green grass in your paddock around the base of weeds, but also you're capturing all that sunlight, and this plant is continuing to grow even in the harshest of conditions.
Well, what you want to do, Tim, is just pan that camera around and you pick out the only green plants around here, the ones that are still photosynthesizing in the middle of a drought, are the ones that everybody eliminates. So right when we need to have green plants functioning, we kill them all.
So Stuart, you've put in a number of contours as well. You've modified your levels on the farm slightly. And what you're trying to do is capture the water rather than send it down channels into dams and store it in a dam. you're trying to store the water in the soil by keeping it within its contour banks. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, a portion of it. Obviously, you can't keep all of the water. The thing is that prior to Europeans coming here and bringing all of their animals, their hard-hoofed animals, the plants used to control the landscape. So the plants were what moved the water around and the fertility. The moment we had animals that were consuming the plants were no longer able to do that. So what we do is we use contours to help move the water as plants would have once done because of these animals that we run. If we don't do that, then we are constantly losing our nutrients and our water to the ocean.
And what you're saying is you're actually making water climb the hill.
Yes, well,
towards the end.
Most people would think that we're nutty, that you're actually putting water uphill, but no, because you start in a low point and you follow the same level, eventually that same low point will be on top of a hill somewhere else.
Yeah.
We capture the water from the low area and we spill it onto the high area, where traditionally, if you go to any farming blocks, you'll find that they've done the reverse. They've put in what would have been referred to as a contour, which is actually a drain. We call them drains.
Yep.
And they drain the water to the low point. And by draining the water to the low point, that just means you sped it up so it gets to the ocean faster.
So we've got to change our definition of a plumber when we become a farmer.
That's interesting you say that. That's part of the problem, is that we have this plumbing and draining mentality because we came from a country...
You only have to know 3 things if you're a plumber, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. That's probably... You might find a plumber might get offended.
Yeah, they might. I'll look out for the comment.
But if we had a plumbing and draining mentality, because we came from a country where there was plentiful rainfall and rich soils.
Yep.
To a landscape that's very old, very weathered, and lacks in rainfall, regular rainfall. When Stuart crossed the Darling, he described a wetland that was 50 miles wide and 50 miles deep. One wetland. You go out to the Darling today and look at it. So that's how much we've changed it. So what we're talking about is, we know this is how the landscape used to function. How do we get that function in there, yet we still run these animals that led to the destruction of our landscapes? We can easily deal with the plough, the machinery that caused it. The animals are a little more difficult. So if we understand that these wetlands are key, the contours that we're talking about, they act like the wetlands. Except we stretch those wetlands out across our whole landscape.
Yep.
And then we isolate our animals from that area. So we don't need to isolate our animals for the entire landscape, we just have to isolate them from the areas where we need these wet areas.
Where you recapture.
Yes.
Yeah. Now that brings us to the next point, is that you've talked to me about people often know the idea that a monoculture of grass is a bad thing.
Yep.
But they don't go to a monoculture of animals. Would you like to explain to me a little bit about what you think is perhaps one of the main challenges with rotational grazing?
Well, something that I've found is that if you're not careful and understanding the way you move your animals about, you end up simplifying your species of plants that you have growing. If you do a really good job, you can actually produce predominantly grass. And I don't know whether people know that having just grass is a bad thing. I think people think that if they've got 5 or 10 species of grass, that's fantastic, that's a great thing.
Well, I know some people that would think, no, you've got to have clover as well.
Right, well, you only need the clover because the grasses really aren't growing that well, because you need the clovers to help with the nitrogen fixation and so forth. But what we need are plants that feed in a different root zone to the grasses, so that they are bringing up nutrients. And like now, see, this is the thing, I have these discussions with guys that are great, fantastic graziers, but in a time like now, it doesn't matter how good a grazier they were, it's in a drought.
Yeah.
There's no grass growing.
If we have a look at what you've got here, I mean, you've got very little green pick left, but you do have a tremendous amount of mulch sitting on the surface of the soil. And
what you find, that because of the animals that we run here, the chickens particularly, and pigs to a degree, but not as good as the chickens, are fantastic at producing, turning all of this litter in. So this top section is blended with litter and with soil, and it's a beautiful little medium. So when we get rainfall here, when I first came here, I remember which was 3 years ago, we had a 40 mil event. I couldn't believe how much water ran off with no watershed. There's nothing. I mean, there's nothing here. You're talking about a watershed of 20 acres or 30 acres,
Yep.
and there was water flowing down a gully. And I thought that was disgusting to see that. And it had good cover. It wasn't bare by any means. It had beautiful grass cover,
Yep.
but it was just grass.
Yeah.
And now it
So now
takes
you've got deep-rooted plants that are really penetrating the soil.
well,
much better soak.
it's the fact that we've got more litter. See, what happens
Yep.
with the type of, under a set stock condition, with the type of grass that was growing here, it had created a mat. So it gave a nice surface cover, but it also repelled water. See, so it had beautiful cover on it, the opposite what do you expect.
Yep.
You know, you'd expect to see a bare place running water, which obviously it does,
Yeah.
but it also happens if we got the monoculture of this particular grass
Yep.
growing laterally across the slope, so the water's shedding off. Now the chickens have got in, they've busted up some of those runners, and now we get the water is able to soak in.
So we were talking before about how rotational grazing has one big limitation, and that is that we apply it to one species of animal.
Yes.
And what you've sort of really championed is the idea that we should be farming many different species of animal in the one place, because they all give something back that's unique.
Yeah, biodiversity should rule no matter what it is we do. We should have biodiversity. So why would we not need biodiversity in animals? If we're running cattle, as a farmer, we choose to run cattle. As a result, we will end up promoting, initially, if we graze correctly, we'll promote the plants that those animals like. Yep. And that's what deems us to be.
Because they'll prune them back, they'll let sunlight in, those plants will regenerate,
Yes.
so they'll start to dominate.
They'll dominate, that's right.
Yep.
Only to find that that's not actually what the landscape wants. It needs a blend of all sorts of heaps of biodiversity in there.
Yep.
So if we don't manage correctly with a single species of animal, we will simplify the community of plants back to being unhealthy.
Well, we can see an example here. We've got a lowered section of ground, and it's got a different species of grass growing in it to what's outside on the flat ground.
Yeah, and well, I'm glad you've got the observation to see that. So this here is the remnants of where a pig has dug.
Yep.
And so a pig has created this. If you go out into the western country of Queensland or in some of New South Wales, you'll find things called melon holes. Melon hole country is the rehydration area for that landscape. This is what the pigs are doing. They're creating melon holes. But see, the trouble is, every farmer wants everything to look nice and neat and tidy, and nature's not interested in it looking neat and tidy.
Well, little holes are a problem with machines when you're trying to put in your new pasture or seeds and all that sort of stuff.
And they're rough for machines. All of our machines is rough. But stuff that, we got to work around that. We need the landscape to perform. So we understand this little pocket here. Let's say this pocket alone holds 50 litres of water.
Yep.
That's 50 litres of water that definitely
it
could never run off this piece of landscape. And then you've got all the other components, the different plants that grow in here because it gets wetter and stays wetter for longer. There's a whole myriad of things that happen just as a result of that.
All farming is compromise. I suppose your farming is just a different set of compromises.
There's probably a lot more compromises in my farming than in most, I guess. And it's not easy because, you know, you are fighting with, I have the same tendencies as everybody else. I like things to look neat and tidy, but I've had to get over that after a while to realise that we need to have these other plants. We need all of these little differences in our landscape to get things to work properly.
Well, a lot of our Australian country is very flat, very dry. Not a lot of movement through the soil of water.
Oh, it does, but it does move. But see, this is the thing, because we've eliminated the wetlands, that process has all been cut. So that doesn't happen anymore. It used to, hence why we go back to
So you're trying to bring it back with the contour banks and the diversity.
Yes, so we have the contour banks, and on the contour banks is where we want to grow this huge amount of diversity, because it produces the fertility. As the litter breaks down, the water that's captured by the contour bank starts to spread it. So that's what drives it. And then you can grow a grassland, no problem. You can grow a monoculture if you like. You can grow a monoculture of wheat and it will be healthy because it is being fed with biodiverse nutrients through the profile of the soil. And it's all driven by the amount of fertility that's moving through the profile of the soil. If there's not enough, then you won't be able to support a really big crop.
So you're not so much against monocultures like wheat growing in Australia. You're against not balancing that with good biodiverse pockets to also capture the nutrients and feed them.
Yeah, well, nature's rules are you cannot grow a monoculture.
Yep.
It will destroy it, no matter what it is, whether it be animals, plants, doesn't matter, it gets destroyed. So the next thing we run is multi-species of animals, because by running multiple species of animals it changes the type of plants, so it maintains our diversity. And so we use pigs and chickens as primary colonising animals, so they can come into a landscape that's been simplified or downgraded to a degree, and because they have an input of food, there's an input, a degree of input of food that comes in a pellet or whatever.
Yep.
Then they can be maintained. They don't need to rely on just what grows in the paddock.
So you are supplement feeding your pigs, you are supplement feeding your chicken.
Yes.
But what is happening to that supplement feed is it's going back into the landscape in many different diverse ways, and you're feeding a range of plants, not just a single monoculture of plants.
Yes.
At this point, Stuart took us down to the bottom of his farm where there's a significant wetland near the river. He was keen to show us how his contour banks are working not only to transport the water up onto the hills, but also to trap nutrients further down the farm so that they could be recycled in his system. You've got a large contour here. The idea of that is to capture all of your nutrients from your pigs and your chickens and your cattle and everything else before it gets into the river. It lets it slowly wind its way through the floodplain. You say you've created a wetland down here. And so the idea is you're making that water stay as long as possible on your property, and you're building the carbon in the soil and the biodiversity, which you then harvest, take back up the hill and allow to flow down through your contours again.
Yeah, and if we can have the top of that hill green, then we end up getting more rainfall up there and the process starts all over again. Now the rules are, this is according to PA being Peter Andrews, my dad, is that if we harvest the material from the bottom of this area and take it up to the top, we've saved ourselves 1,000 years. So it would have taken 1,000 years for that material to have been moved back up there by insects or birds or whatever the case may be.
Grazing animals or whatever.
It would have taken 1,000 years. So by harvesting that material in 1 year, you've saved yourself 1,000. You tell me any other system that can do that? No other system. No other system can do it. And so all you're doing is replicating what would have taken place before. Trees would have grown up there on the hill. That's what would have attracted the birds that fed in the wetland. The birds feed in the wetland during the day, camp in the trees on the top of the hill at night. Same, kangaroos go up there because they can see where their predators are coming from. They do their business up there. That's the movement of fertility. That's the movement of fertility.
You're just doing that.
Yeah, we're doing it. We have to, because all the trees have been removed. All the birds have been removed.
All the kangaroos have been shot.
Well, in this area they certainly have. They certainly have. So we've broken all of that cycle. So now we have to do it. If we don't do it, then it won't happen, which is what's been going on for ages. So
interesting.
Ideally, if we can rebuild that system so it happens all by itself, that's fine. More than likely, we won't be able to. Not and run the livestock that we run.
Because you've still got to run a farm. You've still got to make money. You've still got to have an output. So you'll always have some inputs. It's just how you're managing those inputs through the system.
Well, the thing is that the inputs that we have are only the feed, the extra feed that the chickens and the pigs require, nothing else. No other inputs. What we're doing is we're minimising our losses. So by having contours which slow down the losses of fertility, the fertility that gets lost off of that area, because it doesn't matter what you do, whether it's chickens, pigs, cattle, sheep, the moment you graze a plant, you will be losing. The moment you eliminate a plant, even if it's just by grazing, you will get losses. So the moment it rains, water moves, the soluble component of your fertility will start moving with that water. If you can slow down the speed of that water, the time it takes before it leaves your farm, you've also stopped the loss of fertility. If you can then harness that fertility in plants on the bottom of your place, harvest those plants, take them back to the top, now you've lost nothing. And
sounds good.
Believe it or not, our landscape is not short on fertility, it's just short on being able to keep it. If we increase the plants that can access it, then we harvest those plants and cart them back to the top of the hill. We've regained it, we've started the system.
So when you were looking at this place, Stuart, you were just telling me that you didn't go down to the bottom paddock and have a look at the grass, you actually went up underneath the trees and had a look at what was growing under the trees.
Yeah, up on the top slope. So I looked at the type of plants that we had under there, because trees attract life. Trees attract the animals, which camp under there and they defecate and so forth, and they also attract birds. So the type of fertility that you can achieve from all of that, plus the dropping of the leaf litter from the tree, will grow you the, whatever the highest successional plants are. So you go there.
You see the capacity for the land under the trees, because you don't know what the farmer's done in the paddock.
No.
Like you explained, you've got to put a heap of fertiliser on.
Yep.
So there's a good tip for people that are looking for a place for the first time. Don't have a look at the main area of paddock that's been cultivated. Go and have a look under the trees.
Yep, that's where you'll find the true potential. And if you go to the worst part of the land where the tree's going, then that'll give you a greater potential, because if that's the worst part, then you know it's only going to get better from there.
Yeah, very good.
Look at their manure. It's telling you the protein carbohydrate balance is right for those animals. If it's too much protein, then they're squirting all over the place. If it's too high in lignin, then you'll have manure that piles one up on top of the other. So in the middle of a drought, to have manure like that, it's pretty good. I used to always run Angus, but up in Queensland here we've moved to these Drought Master Cross. We've got a couple of British breds over the back there. They belong to Reese, young fella who works with us, and but pretty much Drought Master. And we've got a Brangus Bull, which the calves are the Drought Master Brangus Bull cross, which are proving to be quite a nice type. These aren't the sort of animals that I'm used to. I'm a bit of an Angus person or a Hereford person really, but up here these guys seem to do a lot better. They handle the buffalo flies and things like that better. On the buffalo fly, it's interesting what we noticed here as we started to improve the diversity that we had in the paddocks. We found the buffalo fly to bother the cattle less. So there were less buffalo fly biting them. So, they're just one of the improvements that we've seen. And ticks. Don't have any issue with ticks.
That was interesting. You got away with running Angus cattle in Queensland above the tick line.
Yes.
And you said you didn't have any trouble at all with ticks.
No.
And you put that down to the diversity of feed.
I put it down to just the diversity of feed. Yep.
Yeah, wow.
And then of course we've got our mineral supplements here in our trailer.
Yeah, now you provide a huge number of supplements. Can you just sort of give me a little bit of an idea of what you're doing?
So we've got diatomaceous earth in the front here, and then we've got sulphur, we've got salt, we've got dolomite, we've got copper sulphate, we've got rock phosphate, and then we've got charcoal at the back here. Charcoal, actually it's got charcoal and seaweed. Looks like they've got the mix in there, so it's got seaweed as well. With the cattle like seaweed, it tends to be like lollies to them. The chickens get this same mix, and we put the charcoal with it specifically for the chickens because it's good in their gut. It helps it absorb any of the nitrogen in their manure, which means that we can lock nitrogen into the charcoal and we don't lose it, because chicken manure is very high in nitrates, and what we want is don't want that volatilizing going to the atmosphere. We want to be able to keep that. So by having it in the charcoal then goes into the soil as they scratch, and we keep it here on the farm.
As you said before, they're pretty impressive pats. Good consistency there, you're getting maximum bang for your buck out of the feed.
Yeah, that's right. It's just the balance is about right. This one over here is probably a little bit on the loose side, so she's probably consumed a little bit too much protein in her diet. She hasn't got the balance quite right. But when we're getting a pat like that, it means that the animal's working to its optimum. It's getting the best use of the feed, and it's not overdoing it, and it's not attracting all of those external parasites as a result. So it's all good. I don't look so much at the EBVs. The young fellas, they look at the EBVs and all that stuff. That doesn't interest me. I look at the animal.
So you're starting to hand over now to the boys, Stuart, on this place particularly, and you believe that you've probably learned more from stuffing things up than you have from doing things right the first time?
I think you could ask my old man. I reckon he spent 20 years telling me this is how it should be, this is why it should be done like this, and I spent 20 years showing I could do it the other way.
Yeah.
What I realised from that learning was that it doesn't matter how much you say, learn from my mistakes, do it this way because I know this is the way it works. It's not the way we work as humans.
Yep.
We must try it to know for ourselves.
Yep.
Everything we teach in our course is learn by doing. You must go out there, you must do something and look at how it responds.
And there are courses that people can do. They can do your course. They can do
Yeah.
natural sequence farming with you. I will have a link in the description, so if they want to contact you and find out more about a course,
Yep.
that's totally possible.
Yep, they certainly can.
But the big message out of this is don't be afraid of making mistakes.
Nope.
Just learn from them
Yes.
and don't do them again.
Make sure you observe. If you're working with nature, make sure you observe nature, because that's where you will learn. What we teach people at our course is to observe nature, because all of the answers that you want are in front of you.
So this is you actively fertilising your paddocks at the moment, Stuart.
That's
You're
it.
feeding your animals,
Feeding the animals, yeah.
and
So
they do the rest.
it's the only input we have. It's probably the one downside to this business, is that because of where we are, we can't produce what these pigs need for their diet, for part of their diet at least, grains. So if we could, then we could make it complete. If we were able to grow grains down on the lower country, harvest that, bring it back up here and feed the pigs, then we'd have a much more complete system. So it's not exactly how I'd like it to be, not yet, but maybe we'll get there, you know, as the years go by. But these here, this is our sows and our piglets. So these little pink guys here in front, they're just about ready to be weaned. I think they're getting weaned on Friday. So they're at about 7 or 8 weeks of age, and they're very much little rogues. They wander everywhere, and once they get to that age, they're ready to be weaned from mum, because you watch them gradually, every week they'll start straying further and further away from mum, and that tells you that they're ready to go.
Now, you had an interesting observation when you first started. You had a bit of a mortality problem with pigs, particularly around weaning time.
Yep.
But you went and saw your vet, you had autopsies done, you had all sorts of investigations carried out, and what did they come up with?
They found out that it was edema disease, which is brought on by stress. And so what we did was we looked at what we were doing, and one of the things we thought that may have been causing enough stress was the way we were weaning. And so we changed our weaning around more to how I used to always wean our cows and calves, and that is weaning in the yards, one beside the other, and eventually one just moves away, and the weaning process takes care of very easily without too much stress. And so we combined that. We tried a few different things. That was one of the things we tried, and the other thing we did was we reduced the number of sows we were running on the farm at the time. So I suspect that the weaning was probably a big part into the success of us solving the problem with the piglets, because we haven't lost piglets for years now.
And it's rare that people who do make mistakes like that will even admit to them, let alone share their learnings from those mistakes. So thank you for doing that. That's really important.
Yeah, unfortunately, people always, if something goes wrong, they generally like to keep it to themselves. Well, for me, I find that if I make a mistake or something goes wrong, the more I talk about it with others, the more I can source what the problem is, because trying to hide a problem doesn't solve it. If we talk about it, then we research it, we can work out how to solve it. So we're interested in solutions, not keeping it all in-house.
Yeah.
So that's the best way. That's the way I learn, and I'm not afraid to cop criticism. I've copped plenty of it before. I grew up with the best critic around.
Well, Stuart, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'm sure that there's a lot of learning when we go back over these conversations, and I go back and edit this video. It's going to take hours just trying to put together everything that you've said. I've learnt a lot. I'm sure that people that watch this video learn a lot. Thank you very much for not only being brave enough to talk about what you're doing, but to speak about it so passionately and share it with others. It's a real gift.
No problem at all, Tim. Happy to do it. And you're lucky you got out in such a short time. I would have talked for days.
Well, that's all right. I would have talked for days as well. If people want to get in touch with you, you do have obviously training courses that you run.
Yes.
You have a website for Forage Farms.
Yep.
I'll put all of those details in the links below. So all the people have to do is click on a link and they're straight in touch with you. It's an absolute gift that you're giving us this knowledge from your father and from yourself, and how you've both worked so hard in the Australian landscape to actually come to understand what it is that the Australian landscape does that's so different from the European one.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time, mate. We really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks.
Let's stop saying kangaroos are only fit for dog meat. Let's actually value them. Let's find a market for them. Let's be innovative and let's sell our produce.
Definitely. Even if we don't want to eat them in Australia, there'll be other people. There are other people around the world that would be desperate to eat kangaroo. They'd be happy to eat it because it's better than the grass that they're eating right now. So they'd be happy to eat kangaroo. But we don't put enough thought into it. You have people who say, oh, we shouldn't kill the national emblem. Well, the national emblem is killing everything. So we need to bring it back into, there's too many people, one lot of people sit on this side of the fence, have no understanding about farming, and then you've got the other guys on this side who are in farming that don't understand enough about the people over this side.
Yep.
And the only way we can do that, we've got to bring these...
We need a central voice.
We need to bring that together. It has to be something sensible, not some extremist view.
So people have to stop liking so much stuff on Facebook and start thinking.
Thinking, yeah. Damn straight, yeah. So these are our male growers.
Gorgeous. You're inquisitive little buggers, aren't you? I won't touch the happy fence.
Big.
Hey boys.
There'll be quite a few of these ready to go this week, I'd say. That one, 2, 4, 5 in here, I'd say I'll be ready to go.
Yeah, righto. Sniff the land.
I'll eat that. So these guys here, you'd have to ask Reese, but they'd be about 5 months, I'd say. These bigger fellas.
So you turn off your boars at about 4.5 to 5 months.
Yep.
So you let them go another couple of weeks to what a commercial grower would.
Yeah.
But there's not a significant difference in the performance that you're getting out of your animals on this landscape.
Well, I don't know for sure. I don't think so. The thing is that ours weigh a lot more for the size of the animals simply because they get their muscles all working because they're walking around more.
And you're getting a better value price for your meat.
Oh,
so it's worth waiting a couple of extra weeks for as well.
Oh yeah. I mean,
like you can argue South Store and you can argue free range and you can do all that sort of stuff, but what you're saying is if they get to walk around, they get to eat a range of plants and they get to behave naturally and they're not stressed, well, the meat's better.
It is better, it is more dense,
yep.
And you don't need to eat as much. Doesn't mean you shouldn't eat as much. I'm happy for you to eat even more of it if you like, but you don't need to because the mineral density in there and the amount of protein you're going to get is going to be far greater. Therefore, you should be able to eat less, even though you have to pay a little bit more.
Yeah.
But more, why should food should be about what it tastes like?
Well, we've commodified food, haven't we?
You should be able to buy a piece of steak, a piece of a lamb, a piece of pork, and you should be able to eat it with nothing else other than pepper and salt.
Yep.
Yet you go out to a restaurant and guess what? Everything comes with.
You've got to pour everything on it.
They got to pour everything because it's got no flavour.
Yep.
It may be tender, but it has no flavour.
Yep.
You know, so part of the things are particularly with cattle and sheep, they need to be only eating plants.
Yep.
They are called herbivores for a reason. They're supposed to eat herbs. Pigs and
Omnivores.
Chickens are omnivores. So they can eat seeds and grains as part of their diet. They have the constitution to be able to deal with it. Are they supposed to be locked on grain only? No, they shouldn't be. They are omnivores. They should have the option to eat all of those things. So, you know, we seem to have mixed all that up and we've got it around the wrong way as to what we're feeding our grains to. So we're out producing a whole heap of grain for animals that shouldn't even be eating grain. Yeah, so anyway, a lot of changes to be made. I was going to go back to one thing. What we're going to talk about.